All right, let's start with reason number 31, see how far we get. Parallel construction throughout. The case contains parallel construction throughout. There are emails between FBI agents discussing how they are listening to Cox's taped phone calls in real time, much prior to the fictitious story and timeline of how the investigation began. That was given in S.A. Westerhaus affidavit in support of search and arrest warrants. This is relevant to Traverso's First Amendment motion, which questioned when and why the investigation started. Number 32. Intercept on count 1 at docket 304. There is a notice regarding a brief audio-video intercept made outside the presence of the informant. The government claimed that because of their pristine and heartfelt reverence for the law, they were obligated to inform the parties that they had impermissibly been recorded in J.R. Olson's truck on the day of the takedown, but the government decreed they would not use the ill-gotten intercept, and they had repented from their careless trespass sub sponte by omitting it from their intended exhibits. Count 1 is conspiracy to possess unregistered silencers, the ones J.R. Olson tried to sell to Cox and Barney. In reality, this was no more than a failed attempt at a controlled sale. Cox and Barney never agreed to purchase the silencers. Before Olson picks Cox and Barney up to take them to the trucker, bait and switch to make it look like an illegal arms deal, he calls the FBI handler to advise him that Cox and Barney have not agreed to the silencers and to ask what he should do. When Cox and Barney get in Olson's truck, Olson again tries to get them to agree to the silencers. Olson offers to sell the silencers for whatever you'll give for them, but they are still not accepted, and Olson advised he would return them to Fulton. These portions of the audio-video were kept out entirely by government hearsay objections. Once Olson, Cox, and Barney arrive at the trucking lot, where an idling 18-wheeler was provided by the FBI to keep up the ruse, Olson went to retrieve the silencers from a trailer where he had stashed them. When Olson, who had been being a pushy salesman, exited the vehicle, Cox told Barney that he wasn't buying anything from Olson, then handed Barney a pair of gloves and told him to wear those if he touched any of the stuff, because we don't want our fingerprints on anything that is going back to Fulton. This was the intercept that was impermissibly captured outside the presence of the informant. So what does Scrocky do? He mutes the audio for 20 or 30 seconds. Olson is out of the vehicle, but he doesn't stop there. Like the redacted that he is, Scrocky plays the video to the jury as if the audio is an impermissible intercept, but the video isn't. Then, at the moment Cox hands a pair of gloves to Barney, Scrocky pauses the silent video, zooms in on the gloves, and then goes in to this big Sherlock Holmes spiel about how Cox giving Barney gloves shows knowledge that the items are illegal, and therefore it doesn't matter that Olson had previously claimed that the items he wanted to sell were being legally offered by Fulton, who was a Class 3 dealer. Scrocky rocked back in his chair with a glow of Luciferian self-delight at his cunning deceit. Bottini reached over the bar and patted him on the shoulder. At this point, fat, bug-eyed, honest boy Tom Dooley bumbled up to the podium and offered into evidence the same video, the true and correct one with the sound. Scrocky turned as pale as a drowned sailor and whispered loud enough for everyone but the judge to hear, "I thought we covered this in Intercept in pretrial conference, and you stipulated it to be omitted." You stipulated to it being omitted. Dooley blinked through his big Coke bottle glasses a few times. Well, we did stipulate to its omission, but that doesn't stop us from introducing this on our own. Now Scrocky was as red as an angry Italian. He demanded a 20-minute recess, then asked the jury be sent home for the day. The next morning, Scrocky had prepared this big written instruction for the jury, assuring them that contrary to the obvious fact that they had been maliciously deceived by the government the day before, the government was only sorting through complex and scholarly issues of evidence that common idiots like yourselves need to jostle their bobbleheads about, that common idiots like yourselves need not jostle their bobbleheads about, and that no one was allowed to draw any negative inferences about the government or Scrocky or Bottini, whose forked tongue kept slithering over the bar and into Scrocky's pointy little ears. The judge, being the redacted that he is, read the instruction to the jury. The instruction was as deceptive as the deception it was written to cover up. This is how you play polar pin the charges on the innocent donkey. The whole false case hangs on the government's credibility. Had the jury been allowed to be disabused of their erroneous presumption of prosecutorial integrity by seeing Scrocky recalcitrant treachery immediately followed by the truth he had twisted into a lie, they may have had the sense to rightly conclude that the government had not the slightest remnant of honor or credibility. This is a small issue on a small charge, but it is illustrative of bigger issues on the bigger charges. Number 33, trucker a ruse versus not leaving. Further evidence of the prosecution's pattern of deception and fraud upon the jury can be found by comparing their answers to pretrial motions, wherein they claim that the trucker was a ruse supplied by the investigation, to their position throughout the trial and in closing arguments, where they claim the trucker was a lie Cox made up on the stand and that he was not trying to leave. Schaeffer Cox Papers, number 34. 3/4 of the story kept out. The story as to the conspiracy goes like this. The CIs bring it up. Number 1. Number 2, we all talk it over. Number 3, we reject the idea. Number 4, I pack up and leave Alaska. That's the 4 key parts. Of those 4 key parts, the only one the jury was allowed to see was step 2. We all talk it over. This means that 3/4 of the vital info was wrongly kept from the jury. Number 35. Protective order on government's motives is structural error. The government filed a motion in limine to prevent the defense from presenting any evidence or making any arguments about the government's motive for bringing the conspiracy charges. This may be error in that it barred several theories of the case that were well supported by evidence the defense had in its possession are: number 1, Cox was publicly and openly trying to expose the state cops for drug trafficking. It was all state drug cops who initiated this investigation when Cox was not suspected of any crime. Number 2, Cox was turning out thousands of new voters that supported exactly the type of people Polar Pen was targeting. Number 3, when Fulton recorded his debrief with the FBI, he asked, "So why are you guys after Schaeffer Cox?" The agent replied, "Because he's been up there in Fairbanks talking smack about the government for too long." Number 4, the conspiracy charge was just a retaliation that was threatened if we didn't plea to 5 to 7 on the guns. Number 36, the if standard. In pretrial motions, the defense supplied affidavits from the military police that the U.S. Marshals and FBI had told them about their plot to murder Cox by going to try to take his baby son, and if he resisted, to shoot Cox dead, thus fixing the Schaeffer Cox problem. When this evidence of a criminal conspiracy was brought to the judge, he saved his fellow blue bloods by jumping all over the word if. They were only going to murder Cox if he tried to keep them from kidnapping his son illegally for political reasons. So the feds only had a murder contingency that the MPs told on them for, not a conspiracy. As is the feds' habit, they accuse others of what they themselves do. However, when the judge got to the conspiracy charges against Cox, he totally forgot the if standard, which is too bad because the AUSAs were only arguing that if the government totally collapsed, and if there was martial law, and if the police were murdering families, and if the defendants were strong enough to fight back, and if there was no way to flee safety, then Cox would kill somebody, but we don't know who or when or why or how or even if it will ever happen. Number 37, no nexus to federal actors. Cox had no connection with federal actors, unlike the Vernons who were mad at the judge in their IRS case. If it may have been error to allow the prosecution to argue that Cox could could have had a motive to kill state of Alaska actors, like the Office of Child Services workers. Then conflate that with the charge of conspiracy to murder federal officials when they didn't have even a theory of who that might be. Who's to say that in the Road Warrior Armageddon fantasy, up which the government's conspiracy charges rest, Cox wouldn't be only moving downstate cops. For that matter, if one of the conditions precedent for this factual scenario is the collapse of the government, then how could there be any federal officials at all, much less to murder? Number 38. Conflating Vernon's case with the present case highly prejudicial. The judge gave a limiting instruction on some but not all of the evidence from the Vernon's separate case. However, the evidence was relevant only to the Vernon's case and was still highly prejudicial to Cox, especially when the government then claimed Cox was putting Vernon up to violence. Number 39. Judge admits to being prejudiced. At sentencing, when it came time for the judge to scold Cox, he couldn't really put his finger on what Cox actually did that was illegal. So he disregarded his own limiting instruction and said, well, just can't help but wonder how much of the Vernon's conduct Mr. Cox is responsible for getting them to do. The Vernons had just pled guilty to conspiring to murder Judge Ralph Beesline. The flip side of that for them is that Aaron Bennett told the Vernons he was going to redacted. The government didn't disclose Bennett as an informant, so his threats weren't brought up as an issue. To top it all off, J.R. Olson was pushing the Vernons like hell, not Cox. On February 19th, incredible. On February 19th, after Lonnie blew up at Cox is heard on the recordings pulling Barney and Olson aside saying, I don't think Lonnie would receive it from me, and I'm going to be gone in 22 hours anyway, but once I'm gone, you two need to go out there and calm him down. Okay, number 40. Judge went off Scrocky, not evidence. If you read the record looking for it, you will see that the judge made findings based rulings not on evidence but on Scrocky's lies. This goes for pretrial motions and especially motions in limine that were decided during trial. There was enough proof of Cox's innocence presented in pretrial motions that if the judge had read them or had enough memory left to remember them, he should have been able to know when Scrocky was lying to him. Okay, we'll start up again at 41 next time.